Welcome to lesson 2. Today we're going to add integers. All right, so vocabulary for today. We're going to look at opposites and we're going to look at additive inverse. So one of those you probably know right off the top of your head. The other one, we'll talk a little bit about that. So start with a little vocab. So integers like 2 and -2 are what we call opposites because they are the same distance from 0 but on opposite sides. So what do we know about their absolute values? Well, they have the same absolute value but on opposite sides of 0. So we're going to complete this graphic organizer about opposites. All right, so first thing we want to do is we want to picture. We want to draw a picture. Well, we got a number line and they've identified one number for us, 3. So what's the opposite of -3? Well, we said it is the number that is the same distance away from 0, but in the opposite direction. So 3 is 3 units, 1, 2, 3 from 0. So let's start at 0 and go 3 units the other way, 1, 2, 3. So that would make -3 our opposite value. Okay, so what's a real world example of an opposite? Well, what if we had hot? What's the opposite of hot? The opposite of hot would be cold. All right. And then how about a math example? Well, we just looked at it up here. Opposites in the math world would be -3 and 3. So two integers that are opposites are also called additive inverses. That's the same thing as opposites. The additive inverse property states that the sum of any number and its additive inverse is 0. So you can show that 2 plus -2 on you can show 2 plus -2 on a number line. So take a look here. So we have 2 plus -2. So if we have +2, we go over to that right 2 spaces. All right. What we do there is from there we add -2 units. Well, that means we're going to go to the left. So we go right back to the left to represent those 2 negative units. Well, if we do that, look where we end up. We end up right back to where we started at 0. So that means 2 plus -2 is actually equal to 0. So you can think of opposites as or additive inverses as canceling one another out. When you put them together, they create nothing because it takes you from one place, goes somewhere, and then goes right back to where you started. So our real world example here says the temperature outside is -5 degrees. Name the temperature that would make the sum of the two temperatures 0 degrees. So if it's -5 degrees outside, how many degrees do we need to get it back to 0? Well, think about it. We've gone from 0 down to -5. How do we get back up to 0? Well, we go 5 degrees or 5 positive degrees. So when we add integers, there's two scenarios we're going to have. We're either going to add integers that have the same sign, or we're going to add integers that have different signs. So first, let's look at adding integers where they have the exact same sign. So in this case, they could both be positive or they could both be negative. It says to add integers with the same sign, add their absolute values. So in this case, the sum is positive if both integers are positive, which that's basic addition that you've been learning since you were, knee-high, as they say. If they're negative, well, then you're going to have an answer that is negative as well. So that one's the one that may be a little more new to you, but I think you'll pick it up pretty quick. So let's look at some examples to see how this is actually happening. So we've got find -3 plus -2. Now we can use a number line to sort of help us guide ourselves through this, and then we'll talk about how that works. So let's start at 0. All right, we're going to start at 0. And the first thing it says is go to -3. So we start at 0, and we're going to go down 1, 2, 3 to get to -3. So there we are at -3. It says we are then going to add 2 negative units as well from there. So from -3, we're going to add 2 more negative units, 1, 2, and that brings us to our answer, which is -5. So we can see that -3 plus -2 equals -5. Okay. Now please note how I put that -2 in parentheses. The reason I do that is because I want to distinguish between that positive plus symbol and my negative on the 2. All right, so rather than it looking like plus minus 2, we want to note that that plus is an operation, whereas the subtraction symbol is not an operation. That denotes the negative number. So let's look at another way of doing this. Okay, so we have negative 26 plus negative 17. So if we keep in mind that we have the same sign on both of these numbers, we know that negative 26 plus negative 17 have the same sign. So we know that our answer is going to be negative as well. All right, so we can kind of use a trick here. We can say to ourselves, well, if I take the absolute value of both of these and add them together, and then I just use that negative sign, that'll give me the answer as well. Well, the absolute value of 26, negative 26 is 26. The absolute value of negative 17 is 17. So I can just add 26 and 17, which when I add them together gives me 43. But since I knew they were both negative when I started, that means my answer has to be negative as well. So I end up with an answer of negative 43. So what do we do when we have integers with different signs? What happens when we have one positive or one negative, or a collection of positives and a collection of negatives? Well, to add integers with different signs, we're actually going to subtract their absolute values. So the sum is positive if the positive integer's absolute value is greater, and it'll be negative if the negative integer's absolute value is greater. Right? So when you add integers with different signs, again, if we use the number lines, we're just going to start at 0. We'll move right for positive, we'll move left for negative. So the sum of p plus q is located a distance from absolute value of q from p. So let's take a look at what that actually means and what's going on there. All right, so we have 5 plus negative 3. So if we use our number line, we can think about starting at 0, and it says to go 5. So we go to the right all the way to letter. Welcome to English class. We go all the way to 5, right? And it says we're going to add negative 3. Well, that means from 5, we are actually going to go in the opposite direction. 1, 2, 3 spots until we get to where we're looking for. So we find ourselves at 2. So that means 5 plus negative 3 is equal to positive 2. Well, let's look at one more where we use this number line to kind of guide us. All right, so for this one, we're going to do negative 3 plus 2. So again, start at 0. We're going to move negative 3 units. So that's going to take us to the left. 1, 2, 3. That takes us to negative 3. From negative 3, we're then going to add 2 positive units. So we're going to go to the right to add those 2 positives. 1 positive, 2 positive. That brings us to what we're looking for, which is our answer of negative 1. So negative 3 plus 2 is equal to negative 1. So let's look at a couple examples where we use that notion of absolute value and finding the difference between the absolute values. So this one says 7 plus negative 7. So let's find the difference in our absolute value. So the first thing we want to do is we want to take the absolute value of 7 and we want to subtract the absolute value of negative 7. So absolute value of 7 is 7 minus the absolute value of negative 7, which is also 7, and that gives us 7 minus 7, which is 0. So 7 plus negative 7 is actually 0, and that makes sense because remember when we talked about opposites or additive inverses? That's telling us that if you put two opposite numbers together, it's going to get you 0. Think about the number line. If we go out to positive 7 and then turn right around and go back to negative 7, we're going to be right back to where we started at 0. Same idea works when it's not additive inverses though. So if we've got negative 8 plus 3, let's think about it as the absolute value of negative 8 minus the absolute value of positive 3. So that would give us 8 minus 3, which gives us a total of 5. But there's one catch. Remember, we said that whichever number has the negative sign to start with, if that number is larger, then that's the sign of your answer as well. So since negative 8 has a larger absolute value of 8, that means that the answer will carry that negative sign as well. So negative 8 plus 3 equals negative 5. Negative 5. One more here. Okay, so we have find 2 plus negative 15 plus negative 2. Okay, so we've got 3 terms here that we want to look at. And I really want you to look back up at these properties you got here, because these are going to be super useful to us. We've got the commutative property, the associative property, and the identity property. All right, and what they tell us is that if you have addition or subtraction, the commutative property says you can put the order of those numbers in whatever you want, and it will not impact your answer. The associative property says you can group them into whatever order you want, and it will not impact your answer. And then our identity is our 1 and 0. If we add 0 to anything, it doesn't change its value. And if we multiply anything by 1, it doesn't change its value. So let's use that to our advantage here. So I've got 2 plus negative 15 plus negative 2. Okay, so I look at this and I try to find things that seem easy for me, and I can't help but notice that I have 2 and negative 2 right away. And I know that those are additive inverses, that if I put them together, they equal 0. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do just that. I'm going to put 2 and negative 2 right next to each other. All right, and then I'll add negative 15 at the end. And I'll tell you what, I can group them however I want. So I'll just put these two guys in some bigger parentheses. You can put brackets or whatever you want. And then I'm going to start there. I'm going to start with 2 plus negative 2. Well, 2 plus negative 2 is the same as the absolute value of 2 minus the absolute value of negative 2. Or just remember they're additive inverses. They cancel one another out. So that gives me 0. And then I add 0 to negative 15. Well, what did that identity property up here tell us? Anything plus 0 is what you started with. So if I add 0 to negative 15, it's not going to change negative 15. It's just going to give me that same number. So 2 plus negative 15 plus negative 2 is actually negative 15. All right, last example. Okay, so we've got a roller coaster and it starts at point A. It's going to go up 20 feet. Then it's going to go down 32 feet, and then it's going to go up another 16 feet, and then it's going to hit point B. And what we are going to do is we're going to write an addition sentence, that's just like a regular addition problem, to find the height at point B. But we want how high is point B in relation to point A. So is it a few feet higher than point A? Is it a few feet lower than point A? Is it 100 feet higher than point A? Is it 500 feet below point A? Where is it in relation to point A? So then we're going to find the sum of that sentence, and we're going to explain exactly what it means. So I'm a visual guy. I like pictures. Let's draw a bit of a picture. So here's point A, right? That's where we're starting. So our roller coaster starts by going up 20 feet. All right, so that's 20 feet. And then it goes down 32 feet. All right, and then it bottoms out a little, and then it says we go back up 16 feet, and then we're at point B. So there's our roller coaster. Doesn't it look exciting? Yes, it certainly does. So let's write a math sentence, an addition sentence that represents this. So we started by going up 20 feet. So what integer can we use to represent going up 20 feet? Well, I'm going to use 20. Makes sense to me. So the next piece was it went down 32 feet, right? It went down 32 feet. So I'm going to use the integer negative 32 to represent going down 32 feet. And then the last part is it went back up 16 feet. So it went up positive 16. So that gives us this problem of 20 plus negative 32 plus 16. All right. Well, I'm going to make this a little easier for myself. I'm going to rearrange my numbers so I can put the like numbers together. I'm going to put these two positives together in the beginning. So I'm going to do 20 plus 16 and then do the negative 32 at the end because I know how to add positive integers. I've been doing that for years. I'll just do that right in the beginning. So 20 plus 16, well, I know that that is 36. So that gives me 36 plus negative 32. So I've got 36 plus negative 32. Couple of ways to think about it. You can think about that number line. Start at 0, go out to the right 36 places, and then turn around and go back towards 0, 32. Where do I end up? All right. I can think about my absolute values. All right. I can take the absolute value of 36 and the absolute value of 32, subtract them. Since 36 has a higher absolute value, my answer will be positive. Or think about the counters that we used, the little red and yellow chips. All right, I have 36 positives, I have 32 negatives. The 32 negatives cancel out 32 of my positives, and what am I left with? I'm left with 4. I'm left with 4. So a couple ways for you to think about that. So what does 4 mean? Well, 4, since it is positive, is 4 feet. So that means point A is 4 feet below point B. Or you could say point B is 4 feet higher than point A. Either one means the same thing. So, guided practice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for you tonight. We'll talk about them tomorrow.